Okay, everyone. So we have quite a number of colleagues started. So we're going to kick off with the webinar now, and other people can join as we get going. So good morning, good afternoon, and thank you everyone who's joined and is in the process of joining to our webinar on charting the path to 2030. My name is Sue Allchurch, and I work at the UN Global Compact, and I'm going to be hosting today's session with my colleagues from Accenture, who've actually helped us pull this survey together. I'll go through the survey in a little minute, first of all, just to give you a bit of background for anybody who doesn't know the UN Global Compact. We are, as it were, the UN's corporate sustainability initiative. We work with businesses around the world to help them deliver their sustainability goals and their business goals by running their business in alignment with these core principles covering human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. There's over 18,000 companies now who have joined at CEO level and have committed to run their business according to these principles and reporting on that annually. We are in 160 countries across the world, and we have 60 resourced local networks in countries all around the world to help enable and support companies in their progress. So that's a little bit about us. Now a little bit about what we're going to do today. So we have done this survey, which has been run by Accenture, very extensive survey, and it's halfway through our journey towards 2030. So we're trying to look at where is the world halfway on our journey, and in particular, what has the private sector done halfway through this journey? So 7 years in, and then what else have we got to do going forward? So the first thing we're going to do is talk to you about that overview and the data that we've got on the private sector SDG report. Michael Hughes and Amelia Hull, my colleagues from Accenture, will be taking you through that. Then I'm going to go through a little bit more focused on some key areas that we know where business can have a profound impact and can help us move faster towards delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. And then finally, we'll definitely have some time for some Q&A, have enough time to answer questions and have a bit of a conversation. And indeed, if there's questions that we can't answer, we will definitely follow up with that afterwards. I've already had one question asking, will we be sharing the recording and the slides? Yes, we will. So at the end of this, we will share all of that with everybody so that you'll be able to see anything that you might have missed. In terms of questions, we'd like you to put them in that Q&A slot at the bottom there. And then we'll be drawing those throughout the session, and we'll be answering those at the end. So please enter in the little Q&A slot before. And yes, we're going to be recording everything for you. Okay, so and now we're going to deep dive into the data on this private sector SDG report. And Michael Hughes, who is the UN's programs lead at Accenture, will lead in part with his colleague Amelia Hull, who is the UN Affairs Manager at Accenture. They've worked very closely with us throughout the year to bring all these different forms of data together. So I'm going to hand over to them now, and they'll take you through the...
Thank you, Sue, and appreciate everyone joining us today to hear a bit more about the private sector SDG stocktake. We were thrilled to partner with the UN Global Compact to publish this analysis, really looking at the private sector's contributions to the SDGs. As Sue noted, we are at the midway point on the SDGs, so it's really critical for us to understand the private sector's involvement with the goals, especially given the significant role we play in driving progress. So in order to conduct a proper assessment, we utilized a variety of data sources to assess private sector impact and sentiment that makes this report one of the most current, comprehensive, and evidence-based analyses of the private sector's contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals that's currently available. Now, to get us started, we wanted to provide a quick orientation on how the research is structured. So the report is divided into two primary sections. The first is a retrospective. So it focuses on how the private sector has contributed thus far to the Sustainable Development Goals. Within that, there is both a macro level overview, helping understand business's impact on a global level, as well as a detailed per SDG analysis for those interested in diving into a particular goal. Now, the detail within each SDG focuses on three primary elements: the state of the world when it comes to an SDG across all sectors, public, private, and civil; the key ways the private sector has contributed to the Sustainable Development Goals; and then a more detailed breakdown of how the private sector has impacted SDGs through their overall contribution, as well as how their revenue is aligned to driving impact through the goals. My teammate Amelia will share a little bit more about that specific breakdown here in a little bit. The second part, by contrast, focuses on how we accelerate action moving forward. We provide 10 key pathways for business leaders to really focus their efforts. Many of these are linked to the Forward Faster initiative, which you'll also hear about today, as well as some policymaker recommendations as we engage the public sector. For each of the business pathways, there's a detailed analysis around what that pathway is, the potential for change it offers, specific actions companies can take, as well as case studies for companies who are leading the way. So how do we go about developing this particular report? We first began this collaboration with the UN Global Compact, as well as other partners at UNDESA, IOE, ICC, and WBCSD. We focused on tackling the two-part question. What have been the contributions of the private sector thus far, and how can we accelerate action moving forward? Given the expansive nature of those questions, we embrace different methodologies to focus the analysis and help us better understand the private sector's impact on the SDGs. This included surveying over 2,800 business leaders from all over the world to better understand their perceptions of the opportunities, the challenges, and the enablers when it comes to the SDGs. We partnered with a number of third-party data providers, in particular Impact, Util, and ESG Book, to leverage their data to better understand the private sector's contributions to the SDGs using data and analytics. We conducted several original macroeconomic analyses to really understand the impact of potential specific actions. So we're trying to test out some possible recommendations to see if they would deliver the impact we had hoped. And then there was obviously an extensive secondary research effort to complement those findings, looking at various publications, research reports, and articles. We also looked at earnings call trends. We met with issue experts throughout the UN system, as well as externally, and looked at those promising case studies of companies really leading the way. So with that context, let's maybe jump into some of the findings. First, we'll explore how the private sector is viewing the SDGs while navigating what is a very diverse set of global challenges that the private sector is currently facing. So now, as we look at those specific business challenges, on a positive note, the businesses really do believe in the SDGs and their crucial role that we play in helping solve them. Well over 90% would agree that the SDGs represent that unifying global vision for a more sustainable and equitable world, and really understand that businesses play a critical role in helping achieve that particular vision. However, globally, we've really lost confidence in our ability to achieve them by 2030. We only have about half of our respondents who feel like we can achieve the SDGs by 2030, and a similar figure believing that enough is currently being done. And unfortunately, that declining confidence really aligns with what we're seeing in terms of overall progress on the SDGs, with some of the latest reports showing that 85% of the SDGs are currently off track. So we therefore have quite a bit of work to do in the remaining 7 years, but we do have a lot of opportunities in that as well. Now, there are a number of barriers that are influencing this particular dynamic. And so they're both a complex set of cyclical as well as structural barriers that are pulling attention and resources away from contributing to the SDGs. As we look at some of those cyclical barriers, thinking things like inflation or geopolitical instability, those are really competing priorities that are undermining the sense of urgency we would normally see around the Sustainable Development Goals. We're also facing structural limitations. So these might include the inability to influence the supply chain, unclear measurement resources, limited access or poor quality when it comes to data and measurement. Those are really limiting the business sector's ability to take action and really make those insightful decisions because we have so many different competing barriers and priorities. Now, these are issues we can concentrate on solving in the remaining 7 years, and that will likely involve engagement with the public sector and policymakers to drive that change and progress. Now, as we think about those barriers and challenges and the exponential rate of change we're seeing globally, we'll have to deploy every tool we have available to meet the goals. And so one of the main ones we'll look towards are the various technologies that can make us more efficient, give us greater insights to make better decisions, and develop the new innovations we need. There is certainly a fair amount of confidence in the possibilities with technology, with many business leaders feeling they can deploy the new technologies, acknowledging that it has freed up investment dollars so that they can innovate into new products and services, and it's really helping enhance their overall profitability. Some of the more high impact technologies in the view of our respondents included data and analytics, the movement to cloud computing, the Internet of Things and mobile devices, as well as artificial intelligence. Now, as always with technology, in particular, many of the emerging solutions, we do want to safeguard against any negative or unintended consequences, whether that's data bias, misinformation, or contributing to further inequality. We will always want to be mindful of how these tools are being used and the communities that engage with them. Now, I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, Amelia, to share a bit more about the impact assessments we conducted as part of this research. Amelia, over to you.
Thank you so much. So to complement the survey, which really focused on what business leaders believe when it comes to the SDGs and their own actions, we also want to deep dive into facts to see what has the private sector contribution been thus far, especially when we focus on that retrospective element. Therefore, to complement the survey, we partnered with 3 third-party data providers to be able to better understand how the private sector has contributed across each of the SDGs, as well as across various different topics. So the first analysis that we did, we partnered with a company called Impact. And we essentially were able to measure the impact of the private sector across 40 different topics. We were then able to better understand and glean insights per SDG, as well as per sector. Now, when we look at the SDG specifically, we're able to rank, has the private sector contributed positively or negatively, as you can see from the ranking on the screen. Now, looking at what the insights are, we see that the private sector has been very positive in terms of really driving economic development. So if we look at certain SDGs, such as 11 and 4 at the top, those are very positive. However, this has come at the cost of climate. So if we look at a lot of the environmental SDGs, those are ranking towards the bottom in terms of having a very negative effect. So we can see that there is a strong split here in terms of how the private sector is having an impact when we look at it holistically. However, we also wanted to have an additional analysis. So in our second analysis, we looked at the company's revenue. So we looked at their product and service portfolio. Next slide. Perfect. We looked at their service and product portfolio to see, in terms of the products that they were creating, was it having a positive or a negative impact? Now, looking at this, we once more deep dived into the private sector's contributions per SDG, and it followed at a high level the same that we were seeing with impact in terms of driving economic development, but at the cost of the environment. However, we do have some positive notes here, in particular around energy. So clean energy development and implementation hasn't been able to rise SDG 7 towards a positive. We also saw a positive around inclusive product development, which has enabled broader equality, though there is still a long way to go there. In addition to looking at the private sector impact, we also want to look at what they were reporting. So for a third analysis, we partnered with ESG Book, and we essentially looked at over 200 metrics, mapped those to their relevant SDGs, and then we wanted to deep dive into what is the private sector measuring and reporting out on to see where a lot of that focus is, because as we all know, what gets measured matters. And so looking at this, we see that certain SDGs are a primary focus of the private sector. Unsurprisingly, they're doubling down on areas that they feel more confident in. So if you look at responsible consumption, or if you look at partnerships, area that they have a lot of actions in and are reporting against. However, we can see that several of the social SDGs in particular, so if we looked at poverty, hunger, and education, are very sector specific, and therefore we're not seeing a lot of reporting from the private sector as a whole. I think this in particular can be useful when we think about some of the standardization of ESG metrics, as well as where policymakers can make a difference in terms of what they're asking from the private sector. So taking a step back and looking at the survey as well as this external analysis, we're able to see that the private sector has really driven, next slide please, economic development and job creation. And they've really driven progress when it comes to this and helped raise the livelihood for many individuals. However, this has come at the cost of the environment, nature, water, biodiversity, and more. Furthermore, it has exacerbated social inequalities and spillover effects when you think of some of the gender equality as well as educational issues. Next slide, please. However, we are seeing that there is a lot of companies that are taking action. So a lot of the leading companies in particular are taking action on the SDGs. We see that 91% of leaders say that they have made a public commitment to at least one SDG. 79% of leaders have identified a business case for advancing an SDG, which makes it easier to take action. And 78% of business leaders have already changed a product or service to more closely align with an SDG, going back to inclusive design and circular economy, as well as greener products. However, businesses cannot do this alone. From the survey, 80% of business leaders said that insufficient policy incentives posed a barrier to be able to contribute to the SDGs. This shows that they want more action and they want more involvement from the government to make sure that it is equal for all companies. Governments were the highest ranking stakeholder in terms of what the private sector wanted more involvement with 44% of business leaders selecting government as a key stakeholder they would like to engage with more. So they're really looking to government to step up to the plate and implement, I would say, very advanced policies. Here we asked about some specific policies, and surprisingly, most business leaders actually did want more policies to make sure that everyone was being evaluated by similar criteria. First and foremost, I would say something that everyone wanted was clear, consistent reporting and disclosure standards, essentially. So that was the number one policy ask, to make sure that they knew that what they were measuring and taking action on was the right thing. There also was several social policies, in addition to 5 environmental policies, to make sure that there was standard and mandatory disclosures across water, climate, and nature. However, even without government intervention, there's a lot that businesses can do themselves. So I'd love to pass it back over to Michael, who can chat a little bit more about how businesses can contribute.
Well, thanks, Amelia. So now that Amelia has shared a bit more about the asks of policymakers, what can we in the business community do to accelerate action? So as part of this effort, we identified 10 pathways to take us on the road to 2030. These are anchored in 3 key themes: expand, transform, and scale. Within expand, we're focused on expanding the benefits of markets to drive greater equity and inclusion within society across items such as the adoption of living wage, promotion of gender equality, along with a recommitment to fundamental issues such as human rights, as well as a recognition that we need to innovate responsibly, kind of harkening back to that technology discussion we had. As we look at transform, how do we shift away from our current, more extractive economic system and change the workings of business to really positively contribute to environmental sustainability? So in this, we're looking towards accelerating climate action, advancing water resilience, and investing in circularity. And finally, with scale, how do we develop new incentive systems to reframe the measures of success when it comes to risk, return on investment, and impact? For this, we look towards the adoption of sustainable corporate finance, as well as a strengthening of sustainable leadership characteristics throughout the organization. Now, each of these pathways is covered more in depth in the report. Companies really should consider where you are on your own sustainability journey. Think about where you could drive the greatest amount of impact to help decide which pathways to ultimately prioritize. So that concludes our kind of quick overview of the report, but I'm happy to pass it back to Sue, who will share a little bit more about how the UN Global Compact is helping companies mobilize towards 2030.
Thank you very much, Michael and Amelia, for that overview. And just to reiterate, everyone, there's lots of information in the report. We will be sharing you a link to the report, so you will you can be able to see it in much more detail. I'm now going to take you through some core pieces of information that we know if we can focus our efforts as a private sector community, we can actually move faster on our path towards 2030. So first of all, some of this information you have seen. What is clear is that there are real good commitments. So pretty much all of business leaders believe that private sector is playing a crucial role in delivering the SDGs. Everyone knows that it's part of their work. And then nearly 80% of companies have identified a business case for at least one SDG. You've seen that before. And 78%, nearly 80% have actually changed a product or a service in order to align to the SDGs. So there is a lot of progress and work. And obviously, this is the companies that we surveyed. They're not just UN Global Compact. They work with our partners at the ICC, IOE, UNDESA. So it's a broad one, but there are companies that are interested in sustainability. So those numbers are pretty high. But even so, you still ask yourself, well, given all that commitment, why at halfway through the journey are only 15% of our targets on track? So a long, long way to go. 85% of the effort still needed to be answered. So what's the problem? Well, we know, we ourselves, businesses ourselves, we recognize that there's much more work to be done. So, less than half of companies believe that the private sector is doing enough. So it's a self-recognition that everyone knows we need to do more. And when we look at exactly what's happening, like 91% of companies in this survey have made a commitment to at least one SDG. So that's pretty much everyone. But by our own recognition, under 40% agree that they're setting goals that are aligned with societal needs. So may have some emissions targets, may have some human rights targets, but they're not what's needed necessarily to achieve the SDGs. So whilst we're making progress, it's just not enough. So in a nutshell, that's the thing that we need to look at. So what is enough? How high should we be? That's what the Global Compact's been doing, and working on a campaign and an initiative with Accenture called Forward Faster, and I'll take you through that. It hangs on a few details. Let's look first at these one by one. Gender. So we're still far behind on gender. Even today, only of the Global 500, Fortune 500, only 5% are led by a female CEO. So still a long way to go. And that means, as well, right through the business sector, it's going to take us 257 years, if we carry on at the same rate today, to close the gender pay gap. So how much are men earning versus women? Still a long way to go. But it's totally possible to address this. If we implemented across the world 6 simple pro-female actions on pay and conditions, we could close 2/3 of that gap by 2030. So it's totally doable. Seen it happen with companies. This is something that we could actually do if we put our mind to it and really aim for equal pay for equal value and for 50% representation in all management levels. Let's take another look at the climate action. So climates are a lot of work we as a business community have been working on. We know that now 34% of large companies have a public net zero target of some point, which is up 7% from 2020. So definitely moving in the right direction. But not all of these are credible and have been ratified by the Science Based Targets Initiative. So they might be good, but they might not be right up and ratified and be clear that those plans that have in place will deliver us on the pathway towards net zero, which is crazy because we could create nearly 400 million jobs by transitioning to a nature positive economy. So it's right for the world, it's right for our business, it's right for people, as well as addressing a climate issue. Let's now look at the cases on labor and decent work. We know that 1/3 of all workers earn less than they need to afford a decent standard of living. So that's 1/3 of people. Sorry, no. Computers. Sorry about that. My computer just froze. But we know that we can do something about this. We can lift 26 million people out of working poverty by collective action on living wage across agriculture, mining, fishing, forestry, and manufacturing. So again, if we focus on this and try to put a living wage and collective action with governments and businesses together, we can lift 26 million people out of working poverty. Then let's look at water resilience. Many of our companies are reporting through the CDP process, but only 12% of CDP respondents have pollution goals on water. And we also know that we could very tangibly help water resilience. We could save 133 billion cubic meters of water by preventing just 20% of the water loss in the 5 most water withdrawing countries. So again, we're looking at targets and the specific basins, where it matters, what can we do we can make a significant impact towards 2030. And finally, we look at financing. So there's lots that we could do in financing, and what we've actually seen when we look at earnings calls this year, in 2022, is the first time we started to see less mentions of the SDGs in earnings calls. So that's something that we need to look at. And it kind of doesn't make sense because if you look at the MSCI World Financial Index, they're showing a 5-year annualized shareholder return at 36% of their most sustainable companies in the index versus 5% for the average. So really, it's definitely something that the finance and investment world should be looking at, and we should be working out what are the targets and what are the goals for corporate investment alignment to the SDGs, which is indeed what we've done with our new initiative, Forward Faster. And this is a global platform that we've got in place to drive ambitious, credible, and corporate action towards gender equality, climate action, living wage, water resilience, and financial investment. We ask companies to commit to a one or any of these goals. There are specific targets and put in place plans and actions to drive against those targets. These will be tracked towards 2030 publicly, and for each area, there is a range of support initiatives, accelerator programs, peer learning groups, working groups in national, regional, and a global level, so that companies can really make this progress together. And in addition, as well as setting the goals and putting the plans in place, we'll be driving an initiative on the ground at a national level, but also at a significantly global level, place for these leading companies to have a seat at the table to advocate for a policy environment within which they operate to enable them to deliver the work that they want to deliver. And this is very important. Again, the survey has shown us this, that businesses want to have a seat at the table and ask policymakers to create this enabling environment. 80% of leaders say that there is insufficient policy incentives to achieve the SDGs. And you saw this earlier in the survey. And here's interesting. There are 3 points here. There's a number, but I've highlighted 3 of them now. The things that businesses would be happy to see legislated for and have policies that would enable them. So 71% say they would be happy to see an adjustment of national minimum wages to a living wage. 65% say they're happy to see mandatory disclosure on gender pay gap. And 62% would be happy to see a requirement for all businesses to set a net zero target on emissions for 2050. So what you see is a lot of interest in being able to work together with governments, with other multi-sectoral organizations to try and make sure that the enabling environment in which they're trying to do the right thing helps them do it. And we'll be putting that in place. So this is it, Forward Faster. Very happy for anyone to join and take part. The QR code shows you how to sign up. As I said, there are targets in gender, climate, living wage, water resilience, and finance and investment. Let me show a quick video.
The automobile is a fad, a novelty.
Horses are here to stay.
I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers.
Women cannot do men's work.
Sustainability is important, but we have more urgent issues.
History has taught us that the leaders who succeed are the ones who meet the needs of the future by moving forward.
To achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, we need forward thinkers. Those who see the SDGs as a driver of growth, not reputation. Who are busy making progress, not just pledges. Who know sustainability is the future, not a trend.
Because right now, only 15% of the SDGs are on track for 2030. Some are even moving backwards. And the majority of businesses aren't setting bold enough targets.
Forward Faster is here to guide companies on the areas where they can make the biggest fastest impact for 2030.
Because sustainable companies give us the best chance of achieving the SDGs. But we need you to take more ambitious action.
The people and planet of tomorrow are relying on the forward thinkers and doers of today. Don't fall behind the times. Move forward faster.
You think they're gonna do it?
Great. That's the end of our little video explaining what we're trying to do. We really know that businesses who succeed will be the ones looking forward, helping to drive this initiative. And it's great for business, but obviously it's really great for the world and for the planet, which is why we're all here. So now we have some time to answer a few questions. I've got a few here, and I will cover some myself, and my colleague from Accenture can also help out. So I have one, first of all, on number of leaders surveyed in the survey. So I'm going to ask you, Amelia, to answer that about, are they just Global Compact membership? Maybe any other questions about the survey itself? And
Of course, happy to answer. So I'm seeing some questions on the survey, some of the data sources, etc. So just to delve further into it, the survey was sent out to a large group of individuals. Primarily, yes, there were respondents from the Global Compact, but not only, we did partner with several other organizations, including the IOE, the ICC, and others. And so we had over 2,800 respondents from, I believe, over 150 countries. All private sector specific, because we did want to make sure to focus on the private sector to see where are they taking action and what are their beliefs. So it was very much focused on that. In terms of some of the questions around some of the breakdowns of the insights, I'd love to delve into it a little bit more as well. So if you go to the report, we do have insights, as Michael mentioned, by SDG. If you go there, there is a breakdown by sector, which means by industry. We have the sector groupings in the appendix if you're curious about a specific sector, as we had to group them into SASB sectors, essentially. Otherwise, there may have been too many sectors to put on the page. But we do have insights on how individual sectors impact each SDG to see which ones are driving the positive and negative impacts. So there is a little bit more insights. And for those that have an outsized positive or negative impact, we do talk a little bit more about how that impact is essentially taking space. So what's the topic? How are they driving that change, et cetera. So we do have more insights in that regard. Also, I believe, as Sue already mentioned, we will be sharing geography-specific breakdowns, which also have a little bit more of those sector-specific insights as well. So if you're curious about your individual geography, please take a look at that. Now, I believe those are all the high-level report questions. However, we're having a few additional questions. I'm not sure, Sue, if you'd like me to jump into those or if you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I'll answer a couple on Forward Faster first, and then I think there's another one. So we go back into the details of that one afterwards. So nonprofits, etc. So first of all, Forward Faster. There's a question about do you need to be a signature of the Global Compact to join the Forward Faster? And the answer is yes. And the reason for that is there's not requirement for company to join all and to set all of these targets at Forward Faster. They are leadership targets, they're leading companies. So you could actually come in and just do one or two, maybe equal pay for equal value or net zero, whatever. But it's important that you are also looking across the board at anti-corruption, at labor, at human rights, as well as climate. So whilst we're really happy for companies to take a lead in one area, we definitely want to make sure that they are looking at having a principled approach to the whole of their sustainability agenda. And we know that companies are doing that when they join and their CEO signs and they work with us to measure their progress every year, right across the board. So yes, indeed, we do need companies to sign. How do you find out more about Forward Faster Agenda on finance and investment? So first of all, it's in the website, but I would also suggest get in contact with us. We have a coalition of CFOs who work on this whole area. They're looking at circularity, they're looking at investment, they're looking at blended finance, and they're also looking at how to make sure businesses are aligning their investment towards the SDGs. We also have a plethora of support, an accelerator coming out, peer learning groups, all sorts of working groups around the world to help in this space of investment. So a lot of it on the Forward Faster website, you'll see each area has an implementation guide, which puts all this information there. So take a look at that. Is there a cost to Forward Faster? No cost at all. There is a fee for joining the Global Compact. It's pretty small and it's related to revenue. But once you're in the Compact, being a Forward Faster organization and leader, there's no extra cost of that. Let's see if there are any other specific Forward Faster ones. SMEs, I'm going to answer the question on SMEs first. And that is, how do they fit into the mix? So broadly, I would say, when I look at Global Compact as a whole, 65% of the companies that are in the Global Compact are small businesses. We have specific programming that helps them understand their way through 10 principles, how to make sure that they're looking across all of their organization, covering all the areas of the principles, and also the essentials of net zero, the essentials of human rights. So we have really sort of helpful resources on that. One thing that's particularly helpful of SMEs is to be part of our supply chain initiative, which we've worked with Accenture and our colleagues here to put forward a supply chain initiative so that companies who want to be able to operate on global supply chains, in global trade, can join and take part in that. So that's how it is from a broad Global Compact. And then in terms of Forward Faster and taking these targets and taking these goals, it's the same for everyone. Our reporting program is very simple. It's simple for all companies of all sizes, so that we can make progress on that.
If you don't mind, if we could jump in for some of this, just to also reflect that in the report itself, while we did survey a lot of business leaders, a good half of these actually do represent the point of views of small, medium enterprises. And so we made sure to try and get the insights from both large companies as well as smaller companies to make sure we're being reflective in the report as well.
Great. And Amelia, maybe the question on Ask a Policymakers survey be interpreted as advocating for a level playing field. Does this suggest a lack of accountability among business leaders? So I'll give my first response, but I'd be interested also to hear from what you heard from the data. What we know from leading companies who want to lead is that there are barriers in their way in terms of policy. And it's the biggest, for large companies, there's two major things that get in their way. One is how hard it is to do across the supply chain. That is the biggest challenge by far. Right, getting to scope 3 is the hardest thing. And then the second thing that's struggling with is the enabling environment. So they do want a level playing field. They want to be operating in an environment which is promoting the right thing to do for society as well as business. So I don't see it as a lack of accountability. I think it's leaders wanting to lead. But Amelia, I would be interested to hear from you as well.
I definitely echo what you just said, Sue, in terms of supply chain being a biggest issue, but also policy. By that, the reality is taking action, you can only have a limited effect as one company. And so they're wanting to make sure that all companies are being held accountable to certain standards and moving forward together. In addition, there's risk and there is a lot more effort needed if you're one company or even a small group of companies taking action. So policymakers business leaders want policymakers to make it the same for everybody, to ensure that everybody is being held to the same standard, is equally accountable, but is also taking action, and to make it clearer actually for everybody what those actions are and how you're being measured on those actions. Right now, we're seeing that policymakers in several places have stalled a little bit here, which is why business leaders are actually stepping in sometimes into that vacuum, primarily through industry consortiums and other get-togethers where through partnerships, they're taking action in this space. So we're seeing that partnerships are actually a big area that businesses are leading into a little bit more to make sure that they are, especially around industry consortiums and industry partnerships, to make sure that they are coming up with a standard ask of their suppliers, a standard way that they're being evaluating and KPIs that they are essentially adhering to be able to push progress in those areas and to be able to spread the risk and the effort among a larger group of them. And so we're seeing more as policymakers and more involvement in partnerships.
Yeah, and we have been given a request to look at this in detail by key countries, by the Secretary General. It's a big priority to make sure that where businesses are really trying to move forward, that the enabling environment is there to help them. And it is something that the UN Global Compact can do. It can get leaders from business and leaders from government together to make sure that the world can progress together. So it is a major priority for us, and which is why it's a core part of Forward Faster. There's one question as well here about, do we have data on whether businesses see the social sector, non-profit and NGOs, etc., as key stakeholders to partner with in order to take action on the SDGs? So I'm going to defer to you, Amelia, on the actual data. I'm just going to say from what I know from many of our studies is this is a high priority for businesses. Again, companies that want to lead want to work in partnership with the civil society, for sure. This UNGA at our private sector forum, which was the Secretary General's luncheon during the summit of the Leaders Summit this year, at UNGA Week. We asked a number of CEOs and government leaders a string of questions of what are the things that would really help them speed up. And the top thing that they came up with was better partnerships across government, civil society, and business. So everybody, CEOs, everyone was saying it's the top priority. If we can work more together, we will be able to move things much more forward. So I think it's, from what I see, it's a high priority for companies. Admittedly, I see the companies that are trying to make change. But that makes sense. Amelia, do you have any more information on that?
Absolutely. So we do actually survey all the business leaders on who they would like more involvement from when it comes to action on the SDGs. Consistently, the number one individual essentially, or stakeholder, I should say, is governments. They always want more involvement and leadership from governments. Actually, the next two are typically consumers. So they're driven to action by the demand of their consumers, as well as actually investors. So increasingly, investors are asking for sustainable development as part of the criteria when it comes to investing in companies, valuing companies, and more. And so those are the primary stakeholders that they want more engagement from, and that are essentially putting pressure on business leaders to take action. Now, we do ask about nonprofits as well, but typically they rank more as the 5th or 6th stakeholder, so more in the middle of the pack, if you will.
Great, thank you. So I've got a couple of questions here related to Forward Faster, and then one more as well on the data. Is there more data behind the MSCI index data point that we shared?
Ooh, I will have to get back to you on that. Yes, please.
No problem. We can absolutely do that. So I have a question from Josephine Thomason in terms of biodiversity being included on Forward Faster. It is possible that that will happen. Let me explain how we decided these 5 points. First of all, these 5 areas put together, if we work on these, we will make the most profound impact on across all of the SDGs. So they are where there is the biggest impact that the private sector can make. There are also areas where we can support companies tangibly. We have good support really can help. We really have expertise, and we have real technical expertise to be able to help companies. And thirdly, because there is a tangible target, we know what high looks like. We know what the target we should be looking for is. On biodiversity, we are launching our Biodiversity Think Lab now, where we'll be working with leaders in industry, leaders in civil society, government, etc., to work on the biodiversity program. And that obviously will be aligning with and helping shape the SBTN, which is the Science-Based Targets for Nature, so that we will soon be able to understand what a goal is. That's a very, very complicated goal, but that is indeed what we're attempting to do. It's impossible for me to say I know when it will be done, because it's an extremely complicated thing to do, to look at biodiversity, but it is definitely the priority that we're working on now, having made sure that emissions targets are clearer. And then there's another question which is about financing. I seem to remember. What is the indicators for sustainable finance or financing investment? Well, again, we have the target in the Forward Faster initiative, and it's related to the percentage of corporate finance that it's aligned to SDGs. The CFO Coalition review that data regularly and understand how targets in different sectors are aligning to the different investments. Neela, there's one more, Michael, on do we think the companies focus too much on frameworks for sustainability to reporting rather than actual actions on the SDGs?
Oh, good question. I don't know if it's I think the problem with the frameworks is there's just too many at this point, both voluntary and mandatory disclosures. It's really creating a lot of noise and confusion, especially for companies that operate in multiple geographies. They're having to deal with multiple local jurisdictions. And so I think that's putting a lot of burden on just trying to make sure that they're getting the accurate data and just trying to meet the bare minimum standards. We've had this discussion in another webinar as well, trying to think through how you actually get to some consolidated views, whether that be at the governmental level or through the voluntary frameworks such as IFRS and others that are working towards that. We're kind of in a little bit of a flux period right now where we still have quite a few standards, but we are seeing a movement towards consolidation, but we are still probably a little ways off from that. So I think companies understand they need to contribute to the SDGs, and like there are a whole variety of frameworks. I think we just need to get to more consistency and more transparency around that. Part of that gets back to some of those barriers around the quality of data that we have, especially across the value chain. We really are lacking some of that, especially in scope 3 type issues. So we see a lot of companies are trying to build up that muscle within their own organizations, but that's still a bit of a journey as well. So hopefully over the next few years, we'll see a little bit of more transparency and consistency in reporting, but we're still in the midst of that particular journey.
I think the reality, I agree with everything Michael said. And another question that we also had was around greenwashing. And essentially, the reality is that companies are having a hard time basically reporting against all these frameworks, but it's also a necessary burden to essentially protect against that. Companies do need to make sure that they are reporting on the action that they're taking, both in terms of the positive, but also potentially where they've fallen short and what they will do to make up that ground, to make sure that they are being transparent with consumers and other interested parties on what their actions are. However, there is a lot of hope that with the consolidation and clear KPIs and clear demands, that reporting burden will lessen, so more of that effort can be focused on the actions and accelerating those actions.
Yeah, I would just like to build on that. So the truth of the matter is there are so many different ways of showing what you're doing. It can be voluntary, it can be getting increasingly mandatory in the EU, etc., etc. But it's rare that there is a tangible goal that's aligned to what we need, and it's rare that you have to show that. In fact, it's not anywhere except the Forward Faster initiative that we are holding organizations and ourselves to the right level of ambition, and that we will track that every year, and that there will be consequences for non-achievement. So this is why we've brought in our reporting platform. This is so that even on the setting your own goals and targets, we will be tracking that every year. We will be looking at what companies are doing. Are they actually achieving? And that is indeed what SBTI does. So companies have 2 years to deliver against their goal, and then they they're noted as not achieved if they don't. So there are, in SBTI, there is what you do is going to get measured consequence for sure. And that is exactly why we're doing Forward Faster. It's the first time where we're really tangibly able to say, this is set the goal, how do we get there? And then we're here with all the support and initiative to help companies get there. So this is exactly designed to stop greenwashing. And leading companies, they want to do it properly. They don't want to be in a club with companies that aren't. So this is exactly why we want to have this initiative to really show that it can be done and how to make it happen. And then there's a question about risk. And does this come before us? And how does this work with in alignment with this work on SDGs? I've got a thought about it, and then I will ask obviously my colleagues from Accenture as well. I think risk is the thing that companies can see tangibly, immediately, and have always looked at. It's aligned to insurance, it's aligned to financial risk, it's aligned to liability of the company. So I think it's something that's very easy to see on an immediate level. What we at the Global Compact want to see is companies going a step forward further to say it's not just risk that we're concerned about. It's about making our world better, helping people to live better, helping our world to be better. So we want to go beyond risk. It's not just as much as this is how I run my business and I don't want to be at risk of climate initiative. Of course, that's important and we should bear it in mind. But we would like to see companies to say, this is how I run my business, this is how it positively contributes to a better world that we all want to live in. So that's how we see it at the Global Compact.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, I might add a couple of thoughts on risk. I would say one is, I think we certainly want a little bit more comfort with risk when it comes to sustainability and like SDG related topics. You know, a lot of the solutions and science and everything continues to evolve. And so we need to be comfortable trying out new products, new services, really making sure that they meet the needs. So whether that's new technologies to measure progress, a new product you want to put in the market, those will all require a certain amount of risk. And so I think we want to see a little bit more experimentation to figure out what really works and what is really driving impact. I would say the other reflection I would share is that on our CEO study, which is another report we launched earlier in the year, in those conversations, I think a lot of the CEOs we engaged with understood that the risk they are feeling to Sue's comments are being felt today. Like they're seeing the impacts of climate, they're seeing migration impacts, food crises. It's all coming to life a lot faster than I think anyone expected. So that risk is very real and very tangible now, which is thankfully spurring some action. But again, I think it's becoming a little scary for a lot of folks as it becomes very close to home for them ultimately when it comes to risk.
Yeah, that's right. I think CEO's job compared to what it was 10 years ago is very different.
Very different.
Managing all these things that are impacting their supply chains, their business, peace, justice, strong institutions, all these things are really having a huge impact. Well, I think we've come pretty much to the end of all our questions. And any others, of course, we will follow up with afterwards. But I would like to thank everybody, Amelia, Michael, for doing the report with us in the first place, but also being here on hand to help everyone. And as we've said, we will be sharing this. We will be sharing a link to the report. There are breakdowns by region and by sector as well, so you'll be able to see that in detail, and also here a link to the Forward Faster initiative. And any other questions that if we haven't managed, we will get back to you, and of course feel free to ask us any questions that you may want. And thank you very much everyone for joining today.
Thank you all and have a wonderful week.
Thanks everyone.